Share options annulled. Antonia Beaumont's voice echoed through the boardroom like a death sentence. Her perfectly manicured fingers slid the termination document across the mahogany table toward me, a smile playing at the corners of her blood-red lips. Every single share is voided. You'll walk away with nothing but your pathetic statutory redundancy package. The room felt like it was spinning 7 years of my life, 7 years of 80-hour weeks, missed birthdays, and sacrificed relationships, all for those options that were supposed to be my financial freedom. Apex Biotherapeutics had just floated on the London Stock Exchange 3 months ago, and my vested shares were worth £2.3 million. It was my escape plan, my entire future. I looked down at the document, my hands trembling, but not from fear. It was a rage so pure it felt like ice in my veins. That's when I smiled. Article 24, B, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. The non-disclosure trap your mother signed when she transitioned you into the chairwoman role. Antonia's smile faltered just for a second, but I caught it. Voiding my shares automatically triggers the removal of your chairwoman immunity clause. They're waiting for your resignation at the boardroom door right now. The color drained from her face. Welcome to the Payback Office channel, where karma doesn't just catch up, it runs a marathon in stilettos and crosses the finish line with a smile. If you're joining us for the first time, or if you've been here watching justice unfold, consider hitting that subscribe button. We're on our way to reaching 7,000 subscribers, and having you as part of this community means everything. Now, let me take you back to where this all began. My name is Alara Sterling, and until 3 hours ago, I was the Senior Director of Clinical Operations at Apex Biotherapeutics. My grandmother raised me in a small flat in Manchester after my parents died in a car accident when I was 6. She cleaned offices at night and worked as a seamstress during the day, but she never let our circumstances define our worth. She taught me that understanding where you come from doesn't mean staying there. It means remembering the people who helped you climb while you're on your way up. That empathy and connection to struggle became my superpower in a corporate world that often mistakes cruelty for strength. Apex wasn't always the cold, calculating machine it became under Antonia's leadership. When I joined 7 years ago, it was still run by her mother, Eleanor Beaumont, a brilliant scientist who'd built the company from a 2-person startup in a garage to a biotech powerhouse with over 3,000 employees. Eleanor believed in profit, sure, but she also believed in purpose. Our mission was to develop affordable treatments for rare diseases that Big Pharma ignored because the profit margins weren't attractive enough. I started as a clinical trials coordinator, managing patient recruitment and data collection for our flagship drug, Apex Cure 7, a treatment for a rare pediatric kidney disorder. The pay was decent, but what kept me there were the share options generous grants that vested over 4 years. Eleanor made sure every employee, from the cleaners to the C-suite, had skin in the game. We build this together, we profit together, she'd say at company meetings, her eyes bright with genuine conviction. I threw myself into the work, coordinating 17 clinical trials in 5 years, always coming in under budget and ahead of schedule. I built relationships with patient advocacy groups, smoothed over regulatory hurdles with the MHRA, and trained a team of coordinators who became some of the most respected professionals in the industry. My dedication didn't go unnoticed. 3 years ago, Eleanor promoted me to Senior Director of Clinical Operations, overseeing all late-stage trials across the company's pipeline. The promotion came with a significant salary bump and, more importantly, a massive share option grant of 150,000 shares at a strike price of £2.50 per share. At the time, Apex was still private, valued at maybe £500 million. But we had 3 drugs approaching MHRA approval, and the smart money said we were looking at an IPO within 2 years. If things went well, those options could be worth millions. They went better than well. Apex Cure 7 won approval 18 months ago, and our second drug, a treatment for a rare blood disorder, followed 6 months later. Suddenly, we weren't just a promising startup. We were a validated biotech company with actual revenue and a clear path to profitability. That's when Antonia came back. Eleanor's daughter had spent the previous decade bouncing between investment banks in the City of London, building a reputation as a ruthless dealmaker who'd sell her own grandmother if the EBITDA multiple was attractive enough. She'd had minimal involvement with Apex, showing up for board meetings maybe twice a year, always dressed like she was heading to a fashion show rather than a biotech company. But when she smelled the flotation money, she came running home. Eleanor was 68 and starting to show signs of fatigue. The board had been quietly pressuring her to name a successor, and despite my hopes that she'd promote one of the executives who'd actually built the company, she chose blood over merit. Antonia became CEO 6 months before the flotation. The change was immediate and brutal. Within weeks, she'd fired or forced out half the executive team, replacing them with finance bros from her London network who knew nothing about drug development but everything about squeezing margins. The company's mission statement was revised, removing all language about affordable treatments and social responsibility. Now, it was all about maximizing shareholder value and optimizing resource allocation. In plain English, profit over patience. I kept my head down and focused on my trials. I had less than a year until my big share grant fully vested, and then I could cash out and leave. Maybe start a consulting firm to help smaller biotech companies navigate the clinical development process. I'd been squirreling away the details of my most successful trials, building a portfolio that would make me attractive to future clients. Antonia noticed my detachment. She wanted loyalty, not competence. She wanted people who'd applaud her brilliance and execute her vision without question. I was neither. The first warning shot came 4 months ago. I was in a pipeline review meeting presenting the Phase 3 results for Apex Cure 12, our treatment for a rare neurological disorder affecting children. The data was exceptional. The drug met all primary and secondary endpoints with minimal side effects. It was exactly the kind of breakthrough that had made Apex special. Recommended next steps, I concluded, are to file for an HRA approval and begin planning for commercial launch. Based on the patient population and our pricing analysis, we're looking at peak annual revenues of approximately £200 million. Antonia stared at me from across the conference table, her expression unreadable. 200 million? She repeated flatly. For a drug that took us 6 years and £300 million to develop? That's correct, I said, confused by her tone. It's a rare disease. The patient population is only about 8,000 inches the UK, but this could be life-changing for... Terminate the program, she interrupted. Silence filled the room. I'm sorry? I managed. Apex, Cure 12 doesn't meet our new investment hurdles. We require a minimum of 3 times return on development costs within 5 years of launch. This drug doesn't clear that bar. Terminate it and reallocate the resources to Apex Cure 19. Apex Cure 19 was a cosmetic treatment for hair loss, a massive potential market. Sure, but hardly the life-saving medicine Apex had built its reputation on. Antonia, with respect, we have children in the compassionate use program who are depending on this drug. We've made commitments to the patient community. We can't just... We can, and we will. Her voice was ice. This is a business, Alara, not a charity. If you can't understand that, perhaps you're not the right fit for the leadership team going forward. The threat hung in the air. I bit back the dozen responses burning in my throat and nodded stiffly. Understood. But I didn't understand. I didn't understand how someone could look at dying children and see nothing but an inadequate return on investment. I didn't understand how Eleanor's daughter had turned into this. That night, I drafted my resignation letter. I'd survive for another 8 months until my options vested. Then I'd walk away from this place and never look back. Except fate had other plans. 2 weeks later, Eleanor Beaumont died of a stroke. She was gone before the ambulance arrived, her brilliant mind silenced in an instant. The funeral was a spectacle, Antonia made sure of that. She wore a vintage designer suit and gave a eulogy that would have won an award, talking about her mother's vision and legacy while carefully positioning herself as the chosen heir to that vision. I stood in the back of the church watching this performance and felt something shift inside me. Eleanor deserved better than this. The company deserved better. The patients deserved better. But I still needed those options to vest. So, I waited. Antonia consolidated power quickly after Eleanor's death. The board, packed with investors who cared only about the upcoming flotation, gave her whatever she wanted. She restructured the company, eliminating entire departments and outsourcing critical functions to contractors. Morale collapsed. People started leaving in droves, good people, talented people who'd built Apex alongside Eleanor. I stayed. 8 months became 6, and 6 became 3. The flotation finally happened on a crisp October morning. Apex Biotherapeutics started trading at £42 per share and closed the day at £58. My options, with a strike price of £2.50, were suddenly worth over £8 million on paper. But I couldn't exercise them until they vested, and I couldn't sell them until 90 days after the flotation per the company's lockup agreement. I just had to survive 3 more months. That's when Antonia started her campaign to force me out. It began subtly. My invitations to key meetings mysteriously disappeared. Projects I'd led for years were reassigned to her London cronies without explanation. My team was scattered across other departments, and my budget was slashed by 60%. I documented everything, every slight, every reassignment, every conversation. My grandmother had taught me to trust my instincts, and my instincts were screaming that Antonia was building a case to fire me before my options vested. 2 months before vesting, she made her move. I was called into a meeting with Antonia and Sterling Thorne, the new chief operating officer she'd brought in from her investment banking days. Sterling was everything I despised about corporate climbers. Slick, soulless, and completely convinced of his own brilliance, despite having never developed a drug in his life. "Alara, we need to discuss your performance," Antonia began, sliding a document across the table. "We've been tracking several concerning metrics in your department." I picked up the document. It was a performance improvement plan, a PIP, the corporate kiss of death. 30 days to meet impossible targets or face termination. "These metrics," I said slowly, scanning the page, "are for projects I haven't managed in 4 months. Projects that were reassigned to Sterling's team." "Exactly," Sterling jumped in, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "We've had to clean up several messes you left behind. Timelines missed, budgets exceeded, quality issues. It's really quite concerning." It was a lie, every word. I knew it, they knew it, and they knew I knew it. "I'd like to review the specific data supporting these claims," I said calmly. "Project files, budget reports, timeline documents. I'm sure there's been some kind of miscommunication." Antonia's smile was razor sharp. "Of course. We'll have Sterling's team compile everything and send it over. In the meantime, we need you to sign this PIP, acknowledging the issues and committing to the improvement plan. I'll need to have my solicitor review this first." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "That seems unnecessary," Antonia said, her voice dangerously soft. "Unless you're planning to be difficult about this." "I'm planning to be thorough," I replied, meeting her gaze without blinking. "I've dedicated 7 years to this company. If my performance is suddenly in question, I want to understand exactly what changed and why." I didn't sign the PIP. Instead, I hired Fiona Abernathy, one of the best employment solicitors in London, and prepared for war. Fiona was brilliant. Within a week, she'd sent a detailed response to the PIP, systematically dismantling every claim with documentation I'd kept over the years. She also filed a formal grievance about the hostile work environment and included a pointed reference to the suspicious timing of the PIP relative to my option vesting date. Antonia backed off. The PIP was quietly withdrawn, and I was left alone to finish out my time. 1 month before vesting, I started planning my exit. I updated my CV, reached out to my network, and scheduled meetings with headhunters. I was done with Apex. The day my options vested, I'd exercise them, survive the 90-day lockup period, sell the shares, and walk away with enough money to never have to work for someone like Antonia again. I should have known it wouldn't be that easy. 3 days before my vesting date, I received a calendar invitation for a strategic planning session with Antonia. No agenda, no other attendees listed, just the 2 of us and a conference room. I almost didn't go. Every instinct told me it was a trap. but I was so close to the finish line and I couldn't risk giving her any excuse to claim I was being insubordinate. I arrived at the boardroom exactly on time. Antonia was already there, sitting at the head of the table like a queen on her throne. In front of her was a single folder. "Alara, thank you for coming," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Please, sit." I sat, keeping my expression neutral. "I'll get right to the point," Antonia continued, flipping open the folder. "We've decided to terminate your employment, effective immediately." My heart stopped. "On what grounds?" "Violation of your employment agreement, specifically the non-compete and confidentiality clauses." She slid a document across the table. It was a printout of an email I'd sent to a former colleague, now a VP at a competing biotech company, 3 weeks ago. The email was innocuous, just industry gossip and an update on my job search. But Antonia had highlighted one sentence in yellow. "The clinical data from our recent trials has been exceptionally strong, particularly in the rare disease space." "This," Antonia said, tapping the sentence with one manicured nail, "constitutes disclosure of confidential company information to a competitor. It's a clear violation of your contract." I stared at her in disbelief. "That's public information. We issued a press release about those trial results 2 months ago. The press release discussed top-line data. Your email implies access to detailed clinical information that hasn't been publicly disclosed." "It doesn't imply anything. I was making small talk with a colleague." "That's your interpretation. Our legal team disagrees." She slid another document across the table. "This is your termination letter. Per Section 7.3 of your agreement, termination for cause results in immediate forfeiture of all unvested equity." And there it was, the real reason for this charade. My share options. 150,000 shares that would be worth over £8 million, gone with the stroke of a pen. "You can't do this," I said, hating how my voice shook. "This is completely fabricated. You're just trying to steal my options before they vest." "Share options annulled." Antonia's voice suddenly rose, sharp and triumphant. She was enjoying this, feeding off my distress like a vampire. "Every single share voided. You'll walk away with nothing but your pathetic statutory redundancy." The room spun. 7 years of my life traded for nothing because this monster wanted to save the company £8 million. But then, something clicked in my brain. A memory from 18 months ago during the leadership transition when Antonia took over as CEO. There had been a special board meeting to revise the corporate articles of association, updating them to reflect the new structure and prepare for the flotation. I'd been asked to take notes at that meeting since the regular corporate secretary was out on medical leave. I'd sat in the corner with my laptop, dutifully recording every discussion, every vote, and every amendment to the company's governing documents. I remembered one article in particular, Article 24B. It had been proposed by Eleanor's solicitor, a crusty old corporate lawyer named Barnaby Fitzroy, who'd been with the company since its founding. The article was designed to protect employee equity compensation from exactly this kind of executive overreach. The language was complex, buried in legal jargon, but the intent was clear. Any executive with chairperson-level authority who unilaterally voided employee shares for reasons other than criminal conduct would automatically trigger a review of their own compensation and authority. More importantly, it would void certain immunity clauses that protected executives from shareholder lawsuits. It was Eleanor's insurance policy, her way of making sure that whoever succeeded her couldn't gut the employee equity program she'd built, and Antonia had no idea it existed. Eleanor had signed the updated articles in one of her last acts as chairwoman just days before her stroke. Antonia had been too busy planning the flotation roadshow to pay attention to the minutiae of corporate governance. She'd inherited the chairperson title along with all the rights and responsibilities encoded in those articles, including Article 24B. I felt a smile forming on my lips, cold and calculating. "Something funny?" Antonia snapped, clearly irritated that I wasn't begging or crying. "Article 24B, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. Her expression flickered confusion, then concern. "What?" "The non-disclosure trap your mother signed when she transitioned you into the chairperson role." I leaned back in my chair, watching the color start to drain from her face. Voiding my shares automatically triggers the removal of your chairperson immunity clause. They're waiting for your resignation at the boardroom door. Antonia's eyes went wide. You're bluffing. Am I? I pulled out my phone and opened my email. I took the liberty of reaching out to Barnaby Fitzroy this morning when I received your mysterious meeting invitation. You remember Barnaby, your mother's solicitor? The one who drafted the amendments 18 months ago? I turned my phone so she could see the email thread. Barnaby had responded within an hour, clearly relishing the opportunity to explain the legal trap Eleanor had set. According to Barnaby, I continued, Article 24B was specifically designed to prevent exactly what you're trying to do. Any unilateral cancellation of vested or near-vested employee equity triggers an automatic board review. During that review, the chairperson's immunity from shareholder derivative suits is suspended. I watched the implications sink in. Apex had gone public at £42 and closed yesterday at £61 per share. Shareholders were happy for now, but there were already rumblings of discontent about Antonia's management style, the exodus of experienced employees, and the shift away from the mission-driven culture. If those shareholders suddenly had legal standing to sue Antonia personally for mismanagement, for the value destruction her leadership had caused beneath the surface. You wouldn't, Antonia whispered. I wouldn't have to, I replied. Barnaby is required by law to report article violations to the board. I forwarded him your termination letter an hour ago. He was scheduled to brief the independent directors at 3. I glanced at my watch. It was 3:47 p.m. Right on cue, Antonia's phone buzzed. Then again, and again. She looked down at the screen, and I watched her face transform from confident triumph to ash and horror. The board is convening an emergency meeting, I said conversationally. I believe they'd like to discuss your decision to void my equity compensation, among other concerns raised about your leadership. Barnaby mentioned something about fiduciary duty violations and potential securities fraud, but I'm sure it's all just a misunderstanding. Antonia's hands were shaking. No, you can't. I'm the CEO, I'm the chairwoman. Actually, per Article 24B, they can. I stood up, gathering my things. The immunity clause that's now void was the only thing protecting you from personal liability for some of your more creative decisions. The Apex. Cure 12 termination, for example. Did you know the patient advocacy groups filed a formal complaint with the FCA about that? They allege that you killed a promising drug program to artificially inflate short-term profitability metrics before the flotation. That was news to her. I could tell by the way her eyes went even wider. Without chairperson immunity, you're personally exposed to any shareholder suits that emerge from that investigation. And Barnaby tells me there are at least 6 other decisions that could form the basis for derivative litigation. The board is probably calculating their exposure right now and deciding whether you're worth the liability. Antonia's phone rang. She looked at the caller ID and flinched. It was Sir Alistair Pembroke, the lead independent director. She didn't answer. You should probably take that, I suggested, though I imagine they'll want to have the conversation in person. The boardroom is just down the hall, after all. I walked to the door, then paused and looked back. Antonia was still frozen in her chair, staring at her phone as it continued to ring. You know what the saddest part is? I said. Your mother built something extraordinary. She created a company that made money and saved lives. She built a culture where people felt valued. You could have continued that legacy. You could have been a leader worth following. I shook my head. But you saw pound signs instead of human beings. You saw employees as cost centers, and now you're going to lose everything because you were too greedy to let one person keep what they'd earned. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The executive floor was eerily quiet. Everyone was either in the emergency board meeting or had found urgent reasons to be elsewhere. As I walked toward the lift, I passed the boardroom. Through the glass walls, I could see Sir Alistair and the other directors gathered around the table, their expressions grave. Barnaby Fitzroy was there too, a thick binder of documents in front of him. Sir Alistair saw me and gave a small nod. I nodded back. The lift arrived and I stepped inside. As the doors closed, I saw Antonia emerge from the conference room, her face pale, her confident stride replaced by uncertain steps toward the boardroom where her reckoning waited. I should have felt triumphant. I just deployed a corporate nuclear weapon and watched it detonate. But mostly, I just felt tired. The truth is, Article 24B was a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. It didn't automatically remove Antonia from power. It just exposed her to accountability she thought she was immune from. What happened next would depend on the board, on the shareholders, and on whether the directors had the courage to stand up to her. But I'd done my part. I'd pulled the thread that would unravel her empire of cruelty. Fiona Abernathy was waiting in the lobby when I exited the lift. I'd messaged her from the boardroom, giving her a heads up about what was unfolding. "How do you feel?" she asked as we walked toward the car park. "Ask me when I know if it worked," I replied. "Oh, it worked," Fiona grinned. "I just got off the phone with Barnaby. The board is voting on whether to request Antonia's immediate resignation. Sir Alistair is apparently pushing hard for it. Turns out he was one of Eleanor's oldest friends and has been looking for an excuse to remove Antonia since the flotation." I stopped walking. "They're actually going to fire her?" "Probably not fire. More like offer her a choice. Resign gracefully with a modest severance, or be terminated for cause and face the shareholder lawsuits without company support." Fiona's smile widened. "Either way, she's done. And Alistair made it clear that any resolution involves protecting your equity compensation. Apparently, he's been furious about the way Antonia has been treating the old guard employees." The weight I'd been carrying for months suddenly lifted. My options were safe. More than that, I'd protected myself and possibly saved Apex from further destruction. "There's more," Fiona added. "Alistair wants to meet with you tomorrow. Off the record, he mentioned that the board is looking for an interim COO while they search for a new CEO. Someone who understands the company's original mission and has the operational expertise to steady the ship." I stared at her. "He wants to offer me the COO position?" "He wants to talk to you about it." "No guarantees, but I think you'd be in a strong position to negotiate." My phone buzzed an email from the Apex board secretary. "All equity compensation actions taken in the past 72 hours have been reversed pending board review of executive authority protocols. Your share option vesting schedule remains on track per your original grant agreement." I read the email twice just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. My options were safe: £8 million still on track to vest in 3 days, and possibly a COO offer that would let me help restore Apex to what Eleanor had envisioned. The lift dinged behind us, and I turned to see Sterling Thorne carrying a banker's box filled with personal items. His face was red, and he wouldn't make eye contact as he hurried past us toward the car park. Fiona raised an eyebrow. "Looks like the purge has begun." That night I sat in my flat with a glass of wine, still processing everything. My phone had been buzzing non-stop, colleagues texting congratulations mixed with confusion, recruiters who'd somehow already heard I was available, and one unexpected call from Barnaby Fitzroy himself. "Eleanor would be proud," the old solicitor had said, his voice warm. "She put that article in place because she knew her daughter. She hoped Antonia would rise to the occasion, but she prepared for the possibility that she wouldn't. You did exactly what Eleanor intended. You used the tools she left behind to protect what she'd built." "I was just protecting my own equity," I'd replied, uncomfortable with the praise. "Maybe, but you also protected the company from someone who was destroying it from the inside. That takes courage." After we hung up, I pulled out an old photo I kept in my desk drawer. It was from my first day at Apex, taken at a company summer party 7 years ago. Eleanor was in the center of the frame, surrounded by employees, her face lit up with genuine joy. I was off to one side, barely visible, just another new hire in a crowd of faces. I wondered what Eleanor would think of what I'd done. Would she see it as justice or betrayal? Her daughter was about to lose everything because I'd weaponized a corporate article. But then I remembered Apex Cure 12, the drug Antonia had killed to boost short-term profitability. I thought about the families who'd been counting on that treatment, the children who would continue suffering because Antonia couldn't see past the next quarter's earnings report. No, I'd done the right thing. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from Sir Alistair Pembroke with a meeting invitation for 9 a.m. the next morning. Subject line: The future of Apex. I accepted the invitation and allowed myself a small smile. The next morning, I arrived at Apex headquarters at 8:45 a.m. The building felt different, lighter somehow, as if an oppressive fog had lifted overnight. Employees who'd been walking around like zombies for months were chatting in the hallways, their voices cautiously optimistic. Sir Alistair Pembroke met me in a small conference room on the executive floor, far from the boardroom where Antonia had tried to destroy my career. "Alara, thank you for coming." Alistair was in his late 60s with silver hair and a weathered face. "I'll cut to the chase. Antonia resigned last night, effective immediately. The board has accepted her resignation and is beginning the search for a new CEO." I nodded, unsure what response was appropriate. "We need leadership stability while that search is underway," Alistair continued. "The company is at a critical juncture. Employee morale is in the toilet. We've lost key talent, and our pipeline strategy is a mess." He leaned forward, his eyes serious. "I knew your grandmother, Alara. That caught me off guard." "You what?" "Dora Sterling. She worked as a seamstress for my wife's boutique in Manchester for years, made the most beautiful alterations, could take a 50-pound dress and make it look like haute couture." Alistair smiled at the memory. "When I heard you joined Apex, I looked into your background. Dora used to talk about you all the time, how proud she was that you'd gotten your degree, that you were working in biotech. She passed away. 4 years ago? 5? 5. I said quietly, my throat tight. "I'm sorry." "She was a remarkable woman." Alistair's expression turned serious again. "She'd be proud of what you did yesterday. Not just the corporate maneuvering, but the why behind it. You didn't do it just for the money. You did it because Antonia was destroying something worth preserving." I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just nodded. "The board wants to offer you the position of Chief Operating Officer, effective immediately. We'll put together a competitive compensation package, including a significant equity grant. Your primary responsibility will be stabilizing operations, rebuilding the leadership team, and getting our clinical pipeline back on track." "What about the CEO search?" I asked. "Who are you looking for?" Alistair's smile was knowing. "Someone who understands both the science and the business. Someone who's proven they can execute operationally while maintaining sight of the mission. Someone who has the respect of the employees." He paused. "We're looking for someone like you, Alara, but we understand if you need time in the COO role first. Building a company isn't a sprint." The implication was clear. This was a trial run. Prove myself as COO, and the CEO role could follow. "I'll need to bring in my own leadership team," I said, my mind already racing through the list of talented people who'd left over the past year. "Some of the best people we had jumped ship. I want to bring them back." "Done. You'll have full authority over organizational structure and hiring." "And Apex Cure 12? I want to restart that program." Alistair nodded. "The board is already prepared to approve that. We've received preliminary interest from the MHRA about an expedited review pathway given the patient need. It'll be expensive, but it's the right thing to do." "Then I accept." We shook hands, and just like that, I went from nearly losing everything to becoming the COO of a publicly traded biotech company worth £3 billion. The news broke internally within an hour. My phone exploded with messages, some congratulatory, some cautiously optimistic. After months of avoiding me, I spent the rest of the day in back-to-back meetings with department heads, trying to assess the damage Antonia had done. The picture that emerged was worse than I'd expected. Entire clinical programs gutted, key vendor relationships destroyed, and our reputation in the patient advocacy community in shambles. But there were bright spots. Too, the science was still strong. The drugs in our late-stage pipeline were still viable, and most importantly, the employees who'd survived were hungry for leadership they could believe in. By 7 p.m., I was exhausted but energized. I'd made 3 key hires already, all former employees who'd left during Antonia's reign of terror, and scheduled a town hall for the next day. As I was packing up to leave, there was a knock on my office door. It was Thomas Bailey, one of our senior scientists. Sorry to bother you, he said, hovering uncertainly. I just wanted to say thank you for what you did for standing up to her. I was just protecting my options, I deflected, uncomfortable with the praise. No, Thomas shook his head firmly. You stood up to a bully who was destroying everything Eleanor built. Half the company wanted to do what you did, but we were too scared. You weren't. He left before I could respond, but his words stayed with me. Maybe I had been brave, or maybe I'd just been desperate enough to take a risk that happened to pay off. Either way, I was here now, and I had a responsibility to make the most of this opportunity. 3 days later, my share options vested right on schedule. I exercised them immediately, paying £375,000 for shares worth over £8 million at current market prices. But I didn't sell not yet. If I was going to rebuild Apex, I needed to have skin in the game. The employees needed to see that their new COO was invested in the company's long-term success, not just looking for a quick payout. The town hall was standing room only. I stood on the small stage in the cafeteria, looking out at hundreds of faces, some hopeful, some skeptical. I'm not going to pretend the past year hasn't been difficult, I began. We've lost good people. We've lost sight of our mission. We've made decisions that prioritized short-term profits over the patients we're supposed to serve. I paused, letting that sink in. But we're going to fix it. Starting today, Apex is going back to its roots. We're going to develop drugs that matter for patients who need them, even if the financial returns aren't blockbuster level. We're going to rebuild a culture where people feel valued, and we're going to do it together. The applause started slowly, then built to something that felt like relief mixed with hope. Over the next few weeks, I worked 16-hour days rebuilding what Antonia had broken. I restarted the Apex Cure 12 program and personally called the patient advocacy groups to apologize. I restructured the clinical operations team, promoting talented coordinators who'd been overlooked. I fired the worst of Antonia's cronies and brought back experienced leaders. The board gave me remarkable freedom to operate, trusting that I knew what needed to be done. Sir Alistair Pembroke checked in regularly, offering advice when I asked for it, but otherwise staying out of my way. 2 months into my tenure as COO, we received MHRA approval for Apex Cure 15, our treatment for the rare blood disorder. It was validation that the science was still strong, that we could still execute despite the organizational chaos. The share price climbed to £73 per share. My options were now worth over £10 million. I finally sold half my position, using the proceeds to pay off my mortgage, and set up a charitable foundation in my grandmother's name. The foundation provided scholarships for kids from Manchester pursuing careers in STEM fields. The other half I held on to because this wasn't over yet. 4 months after Antonia's resignation, the board officially offered me the CEO position. I accepted. The press release went out the next morning, and my phone immediately exploded with media requests. The narrative was too perfect. Young executive outsmarts, ruthless boss, saves company, rises to the top. But the reality was more complex. I'd gotten lucky that Eleanor had put Article 24B in place. Lucky that I'd been asked to take notes at that board meeting. And lucky that Barnaby Fitzroy was still around. And I'd been desperate. If my options had already vested, would I have taken the risk? Would I have stood up to Antonia if I didn't have millions of pounds on the line? I wanted to believe I would have, but I wasn't sure. What I was sure of was that I had a responsibility now, not just to the shareholders, but to the employees and the patients. My first major decision as CEO was to restructure our equity compensation program, making sure every employee had meaningful share options. I called it the Eleanor Beaumont Legacy Equity Plan, and it became a model that other biotech companies started copying. The second decision was to establish an independent ethics board with real authority to review strategic decisions. No more killing promising drugs just to goose the quarterly numbers. Apex's share price didn't soar under my leadership the way it might have under someone more focused on short-term returns, but it steadily grew. And more importantly, so did our impact. We got 3 more drugs approved in my first 2 years as CEO, including Apex Cure 12. I still remember the day we got that approval. We held a celebration and invited the patient families. There was a 6-year-old girl named Emma who'd been in our compassionate use program. She'd been in a wheelchair when the program started, but by the celebration, she was running around the cafeteria full of energy. Her mother found me afterward, tears streaming down her face. "You saved my daughter's life," she said, gripping my hands. "The scientist saved her life," I deflected. "I just made sure the program didn't get canceled." "No." She shook her head firmly. "If you hadn't stood up when you did, Apex, Cure 12 would be dead. Emma would still be deteriorating. You saved her." That night, alone in my office, I finally let myself cry. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of gratitude and responsibility. This was why the fight with Antonia had mattered not for the money, but for moments like this. The aftermath of Antonia's resignation was less dramatic than I expected. She landed on her feet, as people like her always do, taking a senior role at a private equity firm where her ruthless approach was considered an asset. We never spoke again after that day in the boardroom. Sterling Thorne and the rest of her inner circle scattered to other companies, their CVs conveniently glossing over their time at Apex. Sir Alistair Pembroke served on the board for another 3 years before retiring, but he remained a mentor and friend. He told me once that watching me rebuild Apex reminded him why he'd fallen in love with business, the possibility that companies could be a force for good. Barnaby Fitzroy passed away 18 months after I became CEO. At his funeral, his daughter told me that one of his proudest moments was watching Article 24B work exactly as Eleanor had intended. "He called you a fighter," she said. "Said you reminded him of Eleanor when she was young." I kept a photo of Eleanor on my desk right next to the one of my grandmother. Two women who taught me that where you come from matters less than what you do with your opportunities. Looking back, I'm often asked if I'd do it all again, knowing the risks. The answer is yes, without hesitation. Not because of the money or the title, but because the alternative was unthinkable. Letting Antonia steal what I'd earned, destroy what Eleanor had built, and hurt the patients who depended on us. That would have been the real failure. Standing up to her cost me sleep and stress, but it gave me something more valuable. It was proof that the system doesn't always protect the bullies. Sometimes, if you're smart enough and brave enough, you can make it work for justice instead. If you've made it this far in my story, I hope it reminded you that workplace tyranny doesn't have to be endured in silence. Sometimes the tools you need to fight back are already there, buried in contracts or articles that nobody bothered to read carefully. And if you found value in hearing about how this played out, consider subscribing to the Payback Office channel. Share these stories with someone who needs to hear that fighting back is possible. Together, we're building a community of 7,000 subscribers who believe that accountability matters and justice is worth fighting for. The scoreboard doesn't always favor the powerful. Sometimes, with the right preparation, it favors the people who refuse to give up.